Welcome to the Posterity Podcast. I'm Wilson Patrick.
And I'm Cruz Cotton.
And today we're interviewing Don Cotton, Cruz Cotton's grandfather. First met Don about 7 years ago when we first started our company, and we needed some good sales training, and one of the best around is Don Cotton. He came in, and several of the lessons that you taught us, I still use today. It really helps me when I'm training other people that are getting into sales. And one of the things that I remember is never say you don't know, because it has a negative connotation to it, but say things like, you know what, I'll check on that for you and I'll get back with you. You know, things like that, just little nuggets that I took away from that meeting 7 years ago that I'm still using today. So I'm really excited to interview you, talk about your career, talk about your family, your faith. And I appreciate Cruz because he's the one who kind of set this up for us.
All right, well, let's get this started. So just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll get this show rolling.
Well, I'm Don Cotton. I'm Cruz's grandfather. I have 5 grandchildren, by the way. Been born and raised in Andalusia. Never left Andalusia for anything. I mean, except for work. Never lived anywhere else, maybe I should say. I'm married. Cheryl and I've been married. Next year will be 50 years.
Wow.
And as I said, we got 5 grandkids. I own and operate a couple of businesses. One is a manufacturing company. We manufacture golf course equipment that's also used on estate mowing, maybe sports turf complexes, and own and operate several billboards around the area. It's just been a good place to grow up and a good place to raise a family.
You also rent some property too.
Cheryl and I do own some real estate, and we have an office complex that we operate Turf Pride out of. And in it were several offices that we were able to refurbish and have several tenants. It's worked out pretty good for us.
That's awesome. So tell us about your kids. You have 2?
Got 2.
Yeah.
Chase, which is Cruz's dad. He's our oldest. And then Rain, our youngest, Rain and Lauren, and their 2 kids live up in the Roswell, Georgia area, and proud of both of them. I've been told that the success of a man is measured by the success of his children, and I'm a great success.
That's right.
Both of them have been very successful, good kids.
Yeah, you have. I actually met Chase before I ever met you, and so you can tell he comes from a good line. I'll put it that way. Well, tell us a little bit about your early life. Did you grow up in Andalusia?
Grew up in Andalusia, graduated Andalusia High School in 1974. We were the largest class to receive diplomas. 208 of us walked the stage, and that's no other class large before or after that, even though our oldest granddaughter graduated Andalusia High School this year. Her class is still not as large as the class of 1974. But grew up in the tractor business. My dad was a Ford tractor dealer, and he was in business before I was ever born. I've always been around equipment and farming and that industry. I enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I admire the ones that are in that industry. We grew up next to the tractor place, which the building is still there today on Highway 55 South, just inside the Andalusia city limits. So the house that I was born and raised in until I was 4 years old, it was, adjacent to the tractor place within like 50 yards. And Mother said that even when I was in diapers and just walking, I would come up missing, and she finally learned, go over to the tractor place. I would be in there somewhere. And I'd have to say the stories that were told to me that the mechanics and Dad's employees also took care of me, making sure that I didn't get into trouble or get harmed by any way. There's some stories about me looking over in a bucket of oil and fell in it, and they had to pull me out and clean me up and take me over to the house so Mama could take care of me. I can remember climbing on some equipment and one of the guys saying, "Hey, you better be careful, that's going to fall on you." It fell on me, and they had to dig me out, take me over. Me was probably crying with injuries, bleeding from head to toe. Well, maybe not bleeding head to toe, but
Well,
anyway,
that
had to
was
take
a
me back to
different
mama.
day.
Take me back to mama. Make sure mama took care of me. But anyway, I've enjoyed it. I tinkered growing up with engines. Dad bought us a go-kart when I was probably 10 years old, and we ran it until it wore out. And I took the engine apart and laid all the parts out on the floor on the shop towels. And Dad had several mechanics, and there was skepticism that I could get it back together and run again. And I did.
At 10 years old?
At 10 years old,
Wow.
got it back together. It ran, and in rewarding me for that success, my granddaddy went to Taylor Parts Supply Company and bought me I may start crying. Bought me some tools. That was the first tools I ever owned. And then as I got older, as I was 12 and 13 years old, started building dune buggies out of Volkswagens. And I mean, I wasn't even old enough to drive them, so I had to rely on somebody else to drive them around. And then we get on dirt roads and stuff and drive them. And then I built dune buggies for my own use and for family use. And then some of my friends wanted dune buggies built. So 15, 16 years old, I was building dune buggies, welding, painting, all that went along with building up a dune buggy. Painted. Dad had a paint booth, the paint shop area that I would strip down the equipment and repaint it. Painted a church bus for the church we were going to at the time. That was my biggest probably painting job, was painting that church bus. Painted 2 or 3 of my friends' cars. Probably one of my vivid memories and a story that I like to use in giving my testimony. We had a really good customer who lived close to the tractor place, and he owned and operated a grocery store. And for us locals, it's at the corner where you go to Green Acres. Theo Welch was his name. And his nephew, who they raised, Mark Everidge, and I became really good friends, and later in life became business partners. But Mr. Welch wanted me to clean and paint an old 800 Ford diesel that he owned. So we drove it to the tractor place. It was only a quarter of a mile. And I stripped it down, repainted it, put new decals on it, made it look like brand new. I mean, it really looked good. A diesel engine has a component called glow plugs. Glow plugs are used to preheat the engine in cold weather so that it will start. We never use them in the South. And the one wire that went to the glow plugs, I didn't replace it. He didn't need them. He never used them and was useless. But he comes to the tractor place to pick up his newly painted, restored tractor, and he looked at it. And now my family and close friends call me Don Farrell. And he said, Don Farrell, it looks nice, but son, you need to put that wire back on there. And I said, Mr. Welch, that's a wire for the glow plug. You never use them. You will never use them in the South. He said, doesn't matter if I use them or not. He said, I want it fixed. He said, if I let that go, I'll let something else go. And then I'll let something else go. And the next thing you know, I've got nothing but a pile of junk. And I use that in everyday life. If we let one thing go in our life, the next thing, there's something else that we've let go, and now we've let go. So, and the next thing we know, we're in trouble. And, that was just a good life lesson.
It's a good lesson. And thinking about even your, how many years ago was that? I mean, would you say? How old were you when that happened?
I would have been, I don't know if I was even driving yet. I'm probably 14 or 15 years old.
So 50 years ago, more than 50 years
Yeah, I'm
ago.
68.
Yeah. So you, it's amazing how little events like that in life stick with you for your whole life.
It's always stuck with me.
I
learned a lot of lessons through the people that we were associated with. And I mean, not to throw off on any other industry, but farmers are just a good bunch of people for the most part. I mean, they're people, and so I was around most all the farmers in this area, and they're just great people to grow up around. my dad, my granddad, two of the smartest men that I've ever been associated with. My father-in-law was a smart man, Cheryl's dad. And I've just had the privilege of being around and raised by influential. People that had influence in my life. Some of Dad's employees, a salesman. He had a salesman that taught me a lot about selling. And I use those same techniques today. Now, you alluded to me coming in and helping you guys out. It was a sales training course that I learned. Ford had sales training classes over in Vienna, Georgia, and Dad would send me over to those. And most of the time, I didn't get much out of them. I mean, it was really kind of boring. Here I was, probably 16, 17 years old. I guess I was old enough to drive over there. And there was one class, though, that I went to that has really stuck with me. And there's only 4 or 5 simple things that you need to remember to help if you're meeting the public, if you're trying to sell yourself or your services or your product. And that's part of what I came and shared with y'all that time. And I shared that with Chase and Rain as they grew up as well. Chase never has been in a position, I don't think, to use that, but Rain was, and I got the experience. Rain was a little computer guru, and he started early. I mean, I'm bragging about rebuilding 5 horsepower engines when I was 12, 13 years old. Rain was building computers when he was 12 and 13, 14 years old. And he had gotten a job with a local computer guy, and the guy hired him to build his computers for him. And he never would let Rain work out front, And it just happened that he had to be gone. And he had asked Rain to cover the front, and Rain had told me that. So I thought I would go up there just to be around. I didn't know anything about computers, but at least an adult on hand,
Right.
Needed to be there. And this guy comes in and says, Rain got right straight up and went to him, shook his hand, looked him eyeball to eyeball, gave him a firm handshake, something my daddy taught me. And could I help you? And the guy said, I don't know anything about computers, but my kids say they want a computer, and I'm just in here to buy a computer. What do you got? And Rain launched got way over his head fairly quickly. Gigabytes and megabytes and all that kind of stuff. And the guy didn't want to know that. The guy just wanted to know how much the computer was. He had asked, how much is this one? And I wrote on a piece of paper and walked over there and got Rain to look at me and said, shut up, ask for the order. I said, shut up, tell him the price, and ask for the order. So Rain stopped right in the middle of it. He said, sir, this computer is $499. You want me to write it up for you? Boom, that's all it took. So anyway, it worked out well. And Rain has taken that skill to the absolute next level. But he's done well. And as I was bragging on Cruz's daddy as an engineer, he's done well as well. So
absolutely
proud of both of them.
Absolutely.
But you learn all those things, as you say, growing up, and a lot of it sticks with you.
We brought the right person in. I'll say that because I have to deal with sales a lot. I mean, our whole business is around sales. So, building trust with the client, rapport, but also, like you said, shut up and ask for the sale at some level. Not everybody's going to want the same level of detail. So you kind of have to read your client a little bit. But with that, we've kind of talked about your early life, up to maybe high school, graduating high school and stuff like that. Now, tell us a little bit about your college experience.
My college experience was 1 quarter in 2 days. Mark Everidge, who I mentioned earlier, he and I were classmates through elementary school, and spend the week afternoons at his Mr. Welch's store, and which was right. I mean, Mark lived right down the street, and the tractor place was right down close to where Mark lived. So in the general neighborhood, so it was easy for us to hang out together. But Mark and I became really good friends, and Dad had 30 acres of land behind the house where we lived, and he let my older brother Alan, farm that property when he was in the 11th grade, and any money that he made went into an account, and that's what Alan would use to go to college on. So when Alan went off to college, then it was my turn. So I became a farmer and started farming that at 30, 40 acres. And back then we were planting soybeans, which is a really easy crop to grow. And Mark also was, they had a little bit of farmland. So he was farming with his Mr. Welch. And so Mark and I just kind of teamed up together. And we enjoyed farming. And we were in college together. We were at LBW here in town. And we had made it through one quarter. And we were 2 days into the second quarter. And I don't want anybody to take this advice, because you need to get a higher education. I mean, that's valuable. It just wasn't for the two of us. And the second day of the second quarter, we were sitting next to each other, and I don't know which one said, let's quit, let's farm. It was kind of a double dog dare. And we stood up, and Mr. Rouse, Harold Rouse, great guy, love him. He said, fellas, where are you going? We said, Mr. Rouse, we can't take it. We can't, we're going to work. He said, fellas, you need to get at least 2-year degree. We didn't take his advice. Probably should have, but we walked out. And Mark and I started farming together, and we found some land and rented it, and we grew into two good farmers. I mean, and found some land around the county and rented it, and actually ended up buying a combine, a used combine, a truck trailer to harvest our crop with, but we also took that and did custom work where we harvested for other people. And Mark and I did that 4 or 5 years. I never have thought about the timeline. Cheryl and I were dating at the time we started, and Cheryl and I got married during the time that Mark and I were farming together. And Cheryl and I were ready to start our family. Mark wasn't quite ready to start his. So in a mutual agreement, Mark and I are still great friends today. We divided our farm operation up. And Cheryl and I farmed. I was trying to work my way in the tractor place with my dad, which I really loved, but there just wasn't a room for me. He had salesmen. That's kind of what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a mechanic. I could rebuild any engine, but that just wasn't going to be my career path. I'd rather be in the sales side of things, but Dad had some really good salesmen, so there was no room for me there. So Mark and I were farming, and then we divided the farm operation up, and Cheryl and I took it. I had both boys. I would get up early. Became an early bird, still am, and I would get up early and plow, disc, whatever we were doing at the time. And then if Daddy had anything for me to do at the tractor place, I would go in and leave the equipment fully fueled up, ready to go. And Cheryl would take the boys out. Rain was a baby. She would make a pallet that he would sleep on the floor of the cab of the tractor. Chase would sit on the buddy seat, 3 years old, I guess, or 4, and sit there all morning long while Cheryl did whatever we had to do. And then I would grab lunch and take it to the field, and we would all have a picnic lunch with a Hardee's hamburger or whatever at the time. And then she would continue on that afternoon, and I would go back to the tractor place if I had something to do there. If I didn't, she would go back home. And we did that for a number of years, farming, and I really enjoyed it. Good lifestyle. And then one of my dad's top salesmen left him for another job, and that gave me an opening then to come in full time with my dad. And I grew into, I was his top salesman.
So I want to back up a little bit. So whenever you were in high school or whatever, there are some rumors that your dad disowned you.
Yeah.
So can you kind of take us through that story? Is that really true?
Well, kind of, sort of. Not in a bad way. I'll say that right up front. But we grew up around the fireplace. My dad always had a fire in the fireplace. And one of the ways that he would, a chore that he would give us that we could actually earn money was to cut and chop his firewood for him and stack it up in the shed. And I don't know how it came about. I'm sure I was at the tractor place. I was driving. I was 16 years old because I had access to a pickup truck. Someone in the country club wanted a load of firewood. Oh, okay. So I go with my pickup truck to Dad's wood pile, and I load that truck down and take it to the country club. back up to the man's garage, unload it, and he gives me $10. That was the easiest $10 I have ever made. Well, his neighbor walks over there and says, "Hey, son, can you bring me another one just like it?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I'll be right back." So I go back to Dad's house, our house, load it up, load my pickup, and go back to that man's house, unload it, $10. $20, I mean, within like an hour, I had made $20. And I thought Daddy would be proud of me. He comes home, and first thing he says is, "What happened to my firewood?" And he would miss a stick of wood. So now, 2 pickup loads are missing from his. I said, "Dad, I sold 2 loads for $10 a load. I made $20. He said, "That's fun. Give it to me." Well, it was his wood. So I had to give him the money. And he said, "Look, I don't mind you using my chainsaws. You can go down in the wood and cut all the woods and cut all the trees you want. We cut dead trees, but don't be selling my wood." Okay. So I sold 2 or 3 months. The word got out around town, and I was selling pickup loads of firewood that I was harvesting myself, not Dad's. And then a tornado comes through all the locals would call Green Acres, and it devastated that neighborhood. With the big pines were blown over, uprooted, and I would, as a neighborly, good neighbor, I went over and started cutting the trees up and clearing up the streets and the driveways. And I was cutting all those big pine trees up like they were firewood. Well, this gentleman stopped. I was probably gassing up the chainsaw, maybe sharpening the chain. This gentleman walks up to me, introduced himself, and said, "If you will cut this up 7.5 feet long, and if you could get it to the wood yard, they'll give you a ticket for the weight. You bring it to my office and I'll pay you for it. There's no reason to cut it up like you're doing and in the city or somebody having hauled it off." So I took his advice, and that's called pulpwood. So I started cutting pulpwood and hauling it to the wood yard in a tilt trailer that my dad had at the tractor place that he loaned to me, and got the weight tickets on it after 3 or 4 weeks and took it to Mr. Mason's office, and he paid me for it. And he said, "Son, if you'd like to make some more money," because we had cleaned up the neighborhood, we were done. He said, "I've got some plantation pine trees, which are small pines." He said, "It'd be perfect for you guys to work on the afternoons," because I'd hired a couple of my buddies to help me. And the gentleman that owns the property doesn't want any big equipment out there. So you with your truck, and y'all would be great. So yeah, we'll do it. So we started pulpwooding, and I actually ended up buying a pulpwood truck, which is a whole different story we won't get into. And I was industrious, and here my 2 friends and I were pulpwooding. Well, Daddy comes in one day and says, "Boy, you got to stop. Don't be hauling any more pulpwood." And I'm 16 years old. He said, "My attorney told me that if a piece of pulpwood fell off that truck and hit somebody and killed them, they'd sue me for everything because I'm responsible for you. You're only 16 years old." He said, "Don't you?" So we were devastated. That was the end. What am I going to do now? So we had to quit, and we had no other choice. I didn't want my dad, to get in trouble. After, I don't know, a week or two, he comes in and he said, "Hey, the attorney's been doing some research. There's actually a law on the books that dates back and was implemented because of the war, that when the household, the breadwinner, which could be the husband or the dad, had to go off to war, and there wasn't a male old enough, 18 would be legal, that there was a removal of restriction of non-age that then would provide adult status to that underage male family member that could transact business, purchase insurance, real estate transactions. It was a removal of restriction of non-age. And they had done some research and didn't see why it wouldn't apply. It didn't say it was just for war purposes. It was implemented for that, but there was nothing in the statute or the state law that said that the dad had to be off at war. So they went through the process, which meant my dad had to run a public announcement in the local newspaper And it read something like, I, E. Donald Cotton, I'm not responsible for the actions of Donald F. Cotton. He had to run that like 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Well, the word got on the street, and I have got some political history. And one time a political opponent brought me into a meeting, and they advised me that if I was successful in my attempt to be elected, or if it looked like I was going to be elected, they were going to let the world know that my dad had disowned me. And I said, what? And they said, oh yeah. And they opened up and pulled out the newspaper. And now I'm in my 20s at this time. And I just started laughing. I said, guys, let me tell you what that's about. I was 16 years old and I had a pulpwood company. And I was making money and cutting pulpwood, and my dad had to do that so it would I could allow me to buy insurance and he wouldn't be responsible for me. So they kind of folded up the article and said, okay, we won't mention that anymore, because probably would have helped my political career if people had known that even at 16 years old I was that industrious. Yeah. So that was really the rumor.
That's funny.
Kind of, sort of. He didn't diss.
Yeah, when I saw that question on the file today, I was kind of like, well, what's that all about? I said, one of the cool things y'all do, not to jump too far ahead, is every Friday y'all eat together as a family. I've been able to have the privilege of coming to some of those, but your dad's still alive. How old is your dad?
He's
right
95. Now? He turned 95 in February.
Is he still driving?
He's still driving, and we keep an eye on him. He still is very careful in his driving abilities. He's got an unbelievable memory, and of all the people that he transacted business with, he can recall probably most of it. Yes, we started taking Dad out to eat every Friday at noon, and those of us that can in the family attend, and somebody will come into the restaurant and I'll know that he has a connection with it, but it probably would either be their dad or even their granddad. So I'll call them over to the table and say, hey, Daddy, this is Wilson Patrick. You probably know his father-in-law, Ed Short. And boom, boom, and that's all it takes, and then he'll just go from there with it. Yes, we do that, and he's still in good health.
Yeah, that's a really neat story. I know that we kind of backtracked you from where you were, but you were talking about becoming the full-time salesman for your dad. You became his number one salesman. How long did that take for you to kind of reach that number one status?
The way it unfolded, and I have to look back and see that God had a hand in everything that I was doing, and not that I knew it at that time or recognized it at that time. But like I told you, my dad's top salesman had decided to take a job with the new tractor dealer that had come into town. And Dad was pretty devastated. And I happened to be at the tractor place, and he called me in his office, and I could tell he was pretty distraught. And he said that the salesman had quit. And he said, son, I've been away from this so long. He said, I don't know how to sell this stuff. I can't drive those combines like, you can. Those big tractors. I mean, Dad came up on 8Ns and 600 and 800, two-row equipment. And here we are grown into big, 4 and 6 row combines and 150 horsepower tractors and all that. And he said, you can keep farming. He said, I don't have any problem with that, but just wondering if you could maybe just fill in and I'll pay you a commission. If you could just help retain some of his customers. And I said, sure, Daddy, I'll do what I can. Daddy had already thought it through, and he opened his desk drawer up and handed me a legal page and a half of names. He said, here's his customers. And I looked at those 2 sheets of paper with, names on one on each line all the way down. Okay. So I sorted them. And the ones in Baker, because we had reached all the way down to Baker, Florida. That's about as far away as we went. And I lumped all those together that were in Baker, and I drove down to Baker early one morning. And I knew where most of the farmers gathered for their morning coffee, and I walked in. They all knew me, so I didn't have to introduce myself. I just said, hey, guys, just let you know, I'm replacing so-and-so because he's gone to take the job with the new John Deere dealer. And so, okay, good. So we hit it off well, and if they needed anything, I took care of their needs and quoted tractors, traded tractors or whatever with them. Then I made my way up to Evergreen, up to Red Level, Gant, over to Op, down to Florala, and worked those areas. And I'm proud to say, I don't know how many names were on the page and a half, but I retained all of Dad's customers retain them for Dad, all but maybe 3.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I one of the things I had going for me is not only had I learned good sales techniques, but I could operate the equipment. And like when peanut harvest time came along, I made sure that I went to every one of my customers that had a peanut combine, and I took my tachometer with me, and I knew what the main picking cylinder RPM should be, and make sure it was set properly, make sure the fans, the gates were all set properly. And farmers appreciated that. And in a way with the grain combine, I mean, I knew how to drive on. Mark and I had a grain combine, and I knew how to drive it and knew how to set the proper speeds on it to thresh the grains properly. And even setting a bottom plow, or setting the depth of a planter, or setting the angle of a plow sweep. That's things I did on a daily basis, and I could help them do it.
How important do you think it is? Because I've thought about this just with all the people that we have to deal with. The ones that seem to succeed are the ones who are with you beyond the sale. You know, a lot of times I feel like, you know, somebody gets to the sale, they get to the contract, they woo you, and at the end, then you never hear from them again. You know, you don't know where they are, what they're doing, but the ones that stick around and say, how are you doing? Checking, can I, you know, just popping in on you, you know that it's beyond just the one sale that they got from you. They're really more of a partnership approach. Would you say that is kind of the model that you were taking on? I guess that's what it kind of sounds like.
Service after the sale, I think maybe the way to term that. And yes, that's very important. And I think a lot of my customers, we also were friends.
Yeah.
And that can cause some problems. So, because you want to do a special deal for your friends. And I remember this another dad lesson. I would go in one day. I said, Daddy, let's do so and so. Can I give him this much of a discount? I mean, you know, Daddy, he's a good friend. He'd say, Dad, son, you got to make money off your friends. Your enemy ain't gonna trade with you. You're right, Daddy. You know. So, but yeah, just showing a genuine interest, and not only in their family, their kids, recognize special events in their lives. It all will come back, and it fulfills. It fulfills my life. It'd be one thing just to sell a guy something, you take his money, okay, see you later, alligator. You know, I wasn't that way. I appreciated it enough to make sure that they knew that I appreciated it.
Yeah.
And you may never ever sell them another piece of equipment, but maybe you do. And we had customers, and I had customers that would buy from nobody but me.
Yeah.
And I can really get in depth on how I got into businesses I'm in today because of a farmer customer that I had. I don't mind naming names. His name was Matt Ray Huggins. A lot of people watching this podcast will know the Huggins family from the Red Level area. He was a great businessman, a good guy.
Is this the same Huggins as Huggins Sod Farm?
Huggins Sod Farm.
Yeah, I mean, they sell all over the country, don't they?
Well, all over the southeast.
Southeast.
But he was the kind of customer. He was a farmer. And he was the kind of customer, everything he had on his farm came from Cotton Poor Tractor Company.
Wow.
And he was one of my top customers, and we were friends. And here's an example. He wanted to buy a new planter. And I said, Matt Ray, Ford doesn't have a good planter. John Deere has the best planter on the market, the Maximerge 7000. He said, get me one. Well, I had to find a John Deere dealer that would sell me a planter that I could then go and sell to him. But that's just the kind of customer he was. He didn't want to trade with anybody. Well, he planted some turf grass. He planted some zoysia grass next to where he lived. about 5 acres. And I'm up there messing around. I said, what is this? He said, this is zoysia grass. I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, well, it's going to take about 2 years. It's going to be like a lawn. He said, then we're going to bring a piece of equipment and cut it in slabs, and we're going to sell it to landscapers.
This is when he first started
He
the
first
sod
started.
farm.
He first started. And I said, yeah, okay. I mean, he was a smart operator, so I never heard of that kind of stuff. Well, just watching what he was doing, and I ended up selling a mower and a tractor. So I'm benefiting from this sod farm operation that he had started. Well, when it came time to harvest it, it took a special rig that he had borrowed from his brother, who I found out later was in the sod business up in Pale City. He borrowed a tractor that had this cutter on it that sliced underneath the roots of the turf, cut each side of it 16 inches wide. Those slabs came up a conveyor, and 2 guys stood on the back and took those slabs of grass and stacked it on pallets. And once they got it stacked so many high, they dropped that pallet and put another one on. And I was just intrigued over that operation. I'd never seen anything like it. And when the old tractor or the equipment broke down, he had trouble getting parts for it because it came out of Canada. The company that had made that equipment was based out of Canada. And he asked me as a friend, well, he said, have the parts shipped to the tractor place and you take care of them, pay the UPS driver, and then bring them to me. I said, no problem, glad to. And so we showed up on the radar of the company in Canada, and they paid us a visit one day and said, hey, we see we're selling some parts to Cotton Ford Tractor Company, and we would like you guys to handle parts. We have a lot of sod farmers in Montgomery, down to the coast, and Panama City. Oh, man, okay. So they started sending them to us, and we started selling parts to those sod farmers, like I said, up in Montgomery, down to Mobile, Baldwin County area, all the way to Panama City, Dothan area. And then one day they called me, and that part of the business was doing quite well, actually. Want to know, would we want to meet their salesman up in Huntsville and work our way down through the state, demonstrating some equipment that they had. Dad didn't want to. I mean, I had to talk him into it. But, I mean, I had done a good job for him, so it was hard for him to tell me no. And it was like, you do it, don't rely on, this is going to be, if you want to do it, if you want to spend a night, it's your thing.
Yeah.
So I drive up to Huntsville and I meet the salesman. And that week we work our way down through the state, calling on sod farms, introducing ourselves, worked from Huntsville all the way down to Panama City, across to Baldwin County, back up. And we ended up at Huggins Sod Farm. And we had taken orders for over $250,000 worth of equipment.
Wow. And what year was this?
Late 70s.
Wow. So
late
that
70s.
$250,000 like way more than that.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
Well, but what had also happened was in 78 or 9 that we had a drought that hit this area. So farming was really suffering. This came at the perfect time.
Wow.
For Cotton Ford Tractor Company. And so it filled a void that we had because of the suffering that the farmers were going through at that time because of a disaster. So Dad liked it, The bank account looked good.
That's right.
Well,
it's almost like a separate business from what you were
It was
servicing.
totally separate. And then that just put our name kind of on the map. And we actually had a customer appreciation for the sod farmers, and they came into Andalusia and we entertained them, fed them lunch, and they bought equipment, they bought tractors. It was great. And so that end of the business had really taken off, and it had been my responsibility. And my brother Lamar was coming along. He was out of school and he was trying to make his way into the tractor place, and just reached the point that sometimes families can work together real well and sometimes they can't. We got along as a family, but as far as being in business together, it was a struggle. And so Dad just came in one day. He recognized the friction that was happening, and he wanted to keep the family intact. And he said, Don, won't you take the turf business and go with it, and Lamar can take the tractor. So we did. And I started my own company.
Is that Turf Pride?
Well, it
As we know
was
it today?
that Turf Pride, it morphed into Turf Pride.
Okay. So what was the progression when you took the turf side? What was it called? And were you working out of the same place?
No, I had found a place that I could rent to move into. And then Dad said, look, the equipment that he had in inventory, he said, you don't have to pay me for it. You know, go sell it when you get paid for it, and then you can pay me for it. So Dad helped me get started. It was called Don Cotton and Company. And I was out. I moved into a little building north of town and hired a lady to help answer the phone and be my secretary. And then things started getting busier to the point I needed a mechanic. And Cheryl's daddy, who I told you earlier in this interview that was one of the smartest men I've been around, he introduced me to a guy that he said was the smartest man he'd ever been around. And
Which is saying something.
It was saying something. And so I was introduced to Mr. Dick Gaston. And to this day, Dick Gaston has got to be one of the smartest guys I have ever. I hope Dick is listening to this. But he came in and started working part-time, actually. Dick had a garage, automotive repair at his house. And people were bringing their vehicles from all over for Dick to work on. He was just as good as you could get. And he started out part-time, and I was paying him kind of a commission. And this thing just went along, and he came in one day, he said, Don, he said, do you think this is going to keep going? I said, Dick, I hope so. I said, things are growing. We're getting new customers. He said, the reason I'm asking, he said, I've not been going any new work at my garage. And he said, I went in the other day and a bird had built a nest in my toolbox. It had been that long since he had done any work at home. And he said, I don't want to, I don't want to close up if you're going to. I said, no, Dick, I think we're good. So Dick helped me grow the company, actually. He was on the mechanical end of it, and I was on the sales end of it. And we grew it. I had 4 salesmen on the road before we finished that up. And we were covering all of Alabama and the parts of Georgia and Mississippi and the Panhandle of Florida, and did real well with it. The equipment that we were selling came out of Canada, and we were their top dealer, and would be recognized at their big meetings, conferences that they had. And God really blessed us, and we did good.
So you started as Don Cotton and Company. How did you get to Turf Pride? What was that progression like?
That was a journey. We did well as Don Cotton and Company, and we were a dealer. And I picked up franchises for several pieces of equipment, product lines that primarily were used at golf courses, sod farms, and large estates and sports complexes. And one of the products that I landed was a machine to sharpen blades. It came out of England. And I was introduced to the gentleman that owned the company. We were doing a trade show in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was introduced to him, and he wanted to get his reel sharpeners into America. And I needed a set of reel sharpeners. So we bought a set and brought them into Alabama and set them up in my shop. And he came over and trained me on operating them. And one of the services that we offered was to resharpen the blades from golf courses and sod farms. So one of the things my salesman did were bring those blades into the shop that Dick and his helpers would then service. And the gentleman in England wanted to expand into North America. So he asked me, kind of as a favor, if I would take 2 new machines. If he sent 2 new machines over, would I take them to Las Vegas to the golf course superintendent's conference? And I agreed to.
Was this the first time you'd ever been on a golf course to sell equipment?
No, we've been on golf courses in Alabama.
Gotcha.
But this is the introduction to the Golf Course Superintendents Association,
Okay.
which is a worldwide association. They have large conferences. That's where everybody that's in the industry goes to display their equipment, their services, and the superintendents attend training sessions to keep their certifications. It's at that time, it was a big conference. It was so big, there were only 2 or 3 cities in the United States that could accommodate them.
Wow.
With hotel rooms, with conference rooms and with a trade show floor large enough to accommodate all the various types of equipment. And Las Vegas was one of those places. So I agreed to take the equipment only to help him out, really. I didn't know it would go any further.
Yeah.
And ended up having a lot of interest at that show in what he was making. Well, guess what? Somebody in Michigan bought, an equipment dealer up in Michigan bought the equipment that we had on display. Okay, well, guess what? Guess who gets to deliver it to Michigan? He's not coming back over from England.
Yeah.
So this little boy from South Alabama goes to Michigan to deliver the equipment and set it up and train the dealer up there on how to use it. And the first time I'd really been out of Alabama, but that was one of my first ventures, was traveling. Well, I flew out to Las Vegas, but I think I ended up driving up to Michigan and spending some time there. And then the next thing I know, there's a guy somewhere else that wanted a piece of equipment, and another guy wanted a piece of equipment. And so the gentleman from England was calling me up and asking me to do this, asking me to do that.
So what was y'all's partnership based on?
I was just selling his equipment. I mean,
Okay.
you
would just mark it up and
mark it up and sell it.
Yeah.
That's right. And one of the customers that I ended up landing, I had done a demonstration in Indianapolis, and a young man and his wife, who happened to be my age and Cheryl's age, drove down from Toronto, Canada, to attend the demonstration, and ended up buying some equipment. So my first trip into Canada was to deliver the equipment to he had a brother in business, and he and I just hit it off. We had so many commonalities: his religious background, his faith in God, where he and his family were, where he was with his wife, children. I mean, we were mirror images. That we were, like I said, we're only months apart in age. They got married young. Cheryl and I married at 19 years old. They started their family young. Chase was born when we were 21 or 2 years old. I mean, all of that was just gelling, and we just hit it off so well. Well, he had opportunities to sell that equipment in Canada. So he became the Canadian distributor, okay? And then here I am in South Alabama covering the United States. We were doing well. Neither one of us knew that we could make that kind of money in that industry. I came out of the farming business, good living, there's no doubt about that, but this took it to the next level.
Wow.
And we were doing quite well.
How old were you at this time?
I would have been in upper 20s, I guess.
Upper 20s. And so he's got the Canada, you've got North America.
Yeah.
How long
Or
does
America.
this
Yes.
last?
2, 3, 4 years. And we were supporting each other. He would attend the golf course superintendent show. His wife would come with him, and Cheryl would go with me. And it would be in Orlando, maybe in Dallas, Texas, maybe back in Las Vegas. And then I would go to help him with the Canadian Turfgrass Conference, which was usually held in Toronto. So we, helped each other out, and I would go up and spend a week or two with him doing some travel and demos. And we just had a wonderful relationship, a good friendship. Actually loaded up chasing rain, drove up to Canada one time, and they were just little guys, in the van that we hauled them in. And just a wonderful part of our life at that time. And I got a phone call from the gentleman in England that wanted me to come over to England ASAP. He had something he needed to tell me. I couldn't imagine why, but he insisted I come over, so I did. I flew over to England. His salesman picked me up at the airport. We went back to his office.
Is this in London? Where is this?
It was north of London.
Yeah.
And he didn't even ask me how the flight was. He just said, sit down. I sat down. He said, he'd sold his company. I said, I thought he was joking at first. I said, you do what? He said, I sold the company. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, but the new owners, which was the largest golf course equipment manufacturer in the world, the names that your audience would recognize would be Toro,
Yeah.
John Deere. This company was bigger than them,
Wow.
called Ransom, Sims, and Jeffries. They were the oldest golf course equipment manufacturer in the world and the largest, and they had bought him out.
Gosh.
Well, they take me to Ipswich, England, to their headquarters, which was huge manufacturing facility. And I'm introduced to the CEO, the CFO, the CAA, the FBI. I mean, all of them, all the big gurus. And here I am, the little boy from South Alabama, meeting with these chairmen of the boards. And I mean, a conference room, like unbelievable. Took us into a dining hall for lunch. And it was one of those that if you took a sip of water, there was somebody there to pour another sip in that water glass for you. A funny part of this, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you, but I got to. Is to put the little boy in the South Alabama in England. I was the honored guest. So they don't start eating until you eat. You understand? I mean, they're going to sit there until you take a bite. And then they don't drink their iced tea until you take a sip. Well, the starter was some soup. So they put the soup bowl in front of everybody, and they're all kind of looking at me, waiting for me to take my first sip of soup. The spoon, the spoon was that big around. I'd never seen anything like it. It was a round spoon with a handle on it. So I pick it up and I'm going. And then I look around and they're all, I realize it's a sipping spoon. You don't put the whole thing in there. So I started sipping properly.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, so I made it through that. Well, they come over to Alabama. They send their North American representative. They're not representative, but the guy from England that was going to be over all of this. He comes over to meet with me, and we actually do a trade show that year in Houston, Texas, and a golf course superintendent show. And I could just tell by his disposition, some of the comments he was making, something's not right. Just something's not right. And so I finally confronted him at the show, and I said, "Tell me what's going on." He said, "Well, we were going to let you know before we headed back to England." He said, we want the ransom dealers to be the outlet for our product, not Don Cotton and Company. We'll let you have the state of Alabama." I said, "Well, I'm covering all of America. We understand." I said, "I got a Canadian distributor." "Yeah, we understand that too. But we've got ransoms dealers up in Canada that needs to be selling this equipment. We appreciate what you've done, and we'll just see you down the road." Well, what hurt my feelings about as much as anything is I had helped develop that machine for North America. North American golf course mechanics have different functions they do to a blade than what they do in England. And I had modified that machine to do those features that we needed over here. Actually, the guy in England called it Cotton's Dream Machine. That's what it was known as.
Wow.
So it was like they were taking
more your intellectual property at some level.
I didn't have a patent or anything on it, but and it hurt my feelings. And so I make it to a pay phone, and no cell phones back then. And I called Bill up in Canada, and I said, "Bill," we had been discussing what was going on. I said, "Well, Bill, they finally told me." He said, "What is it?" I said, "Well, we're out." "Yeah." And he said, I said, "All the ransom dealers are going to handle it, so we're out." He said, "What are we going to do?" And I tell you, it's scary that he and I think just alike. I said, "Bill, we're going to make it.
Yeah.
We're going to make it. I'm going to take the machine I got at my shop, and we're going to take the parts off of it, and I'm going to have them blueprinted, and we'll copy it. There's no patents on it. In fact, the improvements were some that I had come up with, so I don't feel bad about it."
Yeah.
And he said, "Let's do it." So I got some local fellows here that were engineers and no CAD drawings back then. This was all hand-drawn mechanical. And they blueprinted the parts for me, and I took them to machine shops, and we made a machine.
Wow. And so that's how Turf Pride was born, ultimately?
We had to call that company something, so we called it TI International. And Bill and I and a friend of his, we owned it. They put the money up, and we started here in Andalusia with the manufacturing of it. And we grew it, and that was in 1988. In 1994, we were offered, a company came in and bought it. And I want to tell you that story because that's a God-influenced event in my life. It changed my life. And we sold the company in 1994 to a major company. And I got out of the industry actually for a year or two after that happened. And then they wanted to get back out of it and called me up. Did I want to buy it back? And I didn't want to, but I got somebody else to buy it, and I went to work for them. And then they maintained it for 3 or 4 years. Then they needed to get out for various reasons. And we can go into more detail if you want to about how it happened. And then they wanted out, and I got an investor to buy it. And I ran it for about 3 months for that investor, and then he and I parted ways. He wanted out. I got another company to buy it, and they ran it for about 6 years. Did quite well with it. Then they decided it wasn't for just wasn't fitting into their business plan, and so they shut it down. And I bought all of it back at an auction, and started Turf Pride.
Oh my goodness.
That's where we are today.
Wow. Yeah. That's a big flip there. There is a story that you told us, when you were here that first time that has stuck with me. You have several patents. How many patents do you have?
Four patents.
And, that'd be kind of interesting to hear a little bit about the patent process. But one of the stories was about, a certain problem in the industry that, basically you solved with how you created your machine. Can you tell us more about that story and how the PGA Tour got involved in Augusta and some of these, the Masters and different things like that?
Yeah, I was selling the machines to sharpen the blades, and at a golf course in superintendent meeting, the superintendent of Augusta National had attended, and he came up to the stand and saw the machine. He said, I don't know anything about this product. All I know is my mechanic wants one. And there were 3 or 4 machines at the time on the market that had emerged. He said, we're inviting all of them to come in. You need to give him a phone call, set up an appointment, take your machine to him. So I come back to Andalusia, make a phone call, and his name was Tommy Billiter, and he was the head mechanic at Augusta. So I called him, and he said, bring your machine over and a certain day, and I did. And he said, check, go to the front gate, tell them who you are, and I'll have you checked in. So I drive over to Augusta, not nearly as secured and locked down as it is now. So I got in relatively easy, drove through with my truck and followed the directions, which was down the cart paths. And I'm recognizing from watching the Masters on TV, I see that green on TV. I see that T. I'm driving down through the middle of Augusta National on the cart path to make my way back down to the maintenance shed, which is kind of down in the woods in the middle of the golf course. And nothing elaborate. It was just some tin buildings, looked like more like farm sheds than anything else. To be as prestigious as Augusta was, and for those guys to operate, it was just pretty impressive. That what they were able to do. And so I pull in, and Tommy comes out, introduces himself, and I hold my golf clubs with me everywhere, just in case I would have an opportunity to play, because I've been on some really, really nice golf courses. And he opens my door up. He said, I'll put these in my office. I said, well, I'll lock it. He said, ain't nobody going to steal your golf clubs. He said, I signed you in. He said, you know how many people would love to walk right out there in the middle of that fairway, drop a ball and hit it? He said, they'd fire me. He said, these will be in my office. You get ready to leave, I'll let you have them back. So he takes my golf club and put them in his office. I look up on the wall, and there are the mowers that we service. Some of your viewers will recognize are the twisted blades. It's called a reel, R-E-E-L, a reel. Some people remember them. That's what Granddaddy had. They pushed and mowed their grass. But that's what's used to mow greens and fairways and manicured turf. A reel rotates, and those twisted blades sweeps across the stationary knife that's underneath and creates a shearing action.
Okay.
And that's what cuts grass versus a rotary cutter that everybody's going to be familiar with. Rotaries cut off of speed and impact and sharp edges. A reel can actually turn slow and just shears of grass off. And that's what's used to mow, again, golf courses or what we would call manicure turf. Well, he had these bed knives up on these. I said, Tommy, what are those? He said, those are the knives we use for the tournament. Then he said, they're special. He said, I have to take them to a machine shop and have them machined so that they're so thin that they will mow the greens so close that the ball will roll smoothly and the ball will roll for a long distance. And he said, he just off the cuff said, if somebody would make those so we wouldn't have to machine them, they would sell thousands of them. Okay, that's all I could think of driving back for my 6-hour drive back to Alabama. Okay, if I could just come up with that blade, then we could sell thousands of them. So I knew it had to be something special. And so I came back to the plant, and we had a gentleman working for us that was a metallurgist. And I went to him, and he said, yeah, you need a material that has high carbon content in it. And so I started researching, and there was a product made in Birmingham by the Drummond family called Astroloy that was used in the mining industry. And I thought that would be a high quality steel. And I mean, it is high quality. So the salesman ended up, he brought some samples down to me, but we couldn't, you had to punch holes in them. And the holes would be used to fasten that blade to the piece of equipment. You couldn't punch them.
Too hard?
Too hard.
Wow.
Well, that wouldn't work. And then I stumbled across, through a friend of mine, a blade used in an unrelated industry. It's not even used to cut grass. It has nothing to do with turf at all. And I looked at that blade and thought, where did this come from? Did a little research, found the company that provided it, the blade material. The material comes out of Switzerland. And I got a hold of the sales manager. He's up in Chicago. And I always ask if they're a golfer, because if they are, then obviously they know what a green is. Well, I said, are you a golfer? And he laughed. He said, I went to Purdue University with a golf scholarship. I said, okay. I said, you know what a real mower is? He said, do I know what a real mower is? He said, I worked my way through working at the golf course. He said, I've run a greens mower. I've backlapped it. I've set the reel to bed knife adjustment. I said, okay. I said, I'm trying to make blades for Augusta National. He said, oh, okay. I said, I want some of that blade material that you're selling to that industry, but I need it for my industry, and I need it 2.5 inches wide. And he said, no problem. I'll cut you some samples and bring them down to Alabama. So he did, and we were able to punch the holes, and we were able to machine the blade, and we were able to shape it and form it. And guys, it looked great. It was so shiny. Nothing had ever been made like that. So I sent one to Tommy. I called him. I said, Tommy, I'm sending you a blade. Take a look at it. So I sent it to him. He called me. He said, Don, he said, if this thing cuts half as good as it looks, you're onto something. So he puts it on one of his mowers and takes it to the nursery green, calls me up and said, man, he said, we have never had a mower cut like this. The boss has agreed to let me put them on all 19 greens mowers. I said 19 greens mowers. I didn't misquote. A golf course has 18 greens and a practice green. Augusta National has a greens mower for each green.
Wow.
One green mower, one green. He called me a couple of weeks later and he said, okay, he said, we've gotten approval to use these for the tournament.
Wow.
The Masters. And he calls me up a few days later and he said, I got a story to tell. He said, don't put it in print. You can tell as many people as you want to. He said, if this shows up in publication, you'll get a bill for $1 million. Minimum. Okay. He said, I had set the height of cut, which is as low as it's ever been mowed at Augusta because of your blades, your thin, super thin, beautiful blades. He said, the pros are coming through practice round. He said, we look up and here comes Jack Nicklaus coming down the trail to the shop. He said, my first thoughts was he's looking for his ball. And then it was like, no, he didn't hit his ball down here. He said, his caddy is behind him. He said, Jack Nicholas walks to my shop and says, son, what guys, who's setting how to cut? Tommy said, I am, sir. And he said, you got to raise them. He said, we can't putt on them that fast. He said, the ball won't stop rolling. And he said, no, we can't play that fast. He said, Don, he said, those greens had never been in that condition. And he saw because of your blade. And the word got out, and anywhere for the next few years that a U.S. Open was played, my blades were the ones that they insisted on.
Wow.
And I had a distributor down in actually Miami that handled all the transactions. And we would make the blades and he would sell them. And
did you have a patent on those blades?
No, there was really nothing to patent. There's a process, and we are proprietary to the blade material. And through the years, my supplier has kept his word. I know there's been companies that try to get him to sell them the material, and he won't do it.
Are you still making those blades?
We're making that same blade today.
Wow.
There was a time in the past where one of the companies that owned our old manufacturing facility stopped making them. And then the guy that supplied the blade material called me up and asked me to get back in the business because they had left him with some inventory that he couldn't process. And that got me back in the blade business, which actually I was in when I ended up purchasing all the old equipment at the auction that started Turp Ride about 10 years ago.
That's awesome. Now, wasn't there some another problem that you kind of solved with one of the things that you made? Was it the blade one? I thought there was something else.
Got a patent several years ago on a reel mower. The tedious process of maintenance is keeping the reel, the part that's got the twisted blades, properly adjusted to the bottom blade or the bed knife. And think of a pair of scissors. Even when we were in kindergarten, the teacher gave us a pair of scissors that the blades were kind of flimsy.
Yeah.
And you had to squeeze them together to get them to cut paper.
Yep.
And if you didn't, the paper would get hung up between them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a blade of grass will do the same thing. If those blades aren't adjusted down to a sweeping action, it won't cut grass. It tears the grass, damages the grass. So
which isn't good for a green, right?
Not good. You can't. That one process separates a mechanic from a good mechanic. And anyone that can properly maintain the reel to bed knife adjustment and keep the blade sharp can get a job anywhere they want to go work. At a golf course or where reel mowers are used. Recognizing that was a problem, I thought of how you would redesign the reel in a way that you could spring load and keep constant pressure. The way that the conventional reels are manufactured, you can't spring load them. The adjustments have to be set and locked. They can't move. If I could redesign the reel, then I could spring load and the pressure would always be constant. The tension would always be perfect. There will never be a reason to adjust. A mechanic would never have to touch that unit. And I was called to New York by a company, Ferris Industries, who had developed and started manufacturing rotary mowers. And Mr. Ferris invited me to come up and do some consulting. And when I walked into his office in the conference room, on the blackboard, he had written sustainable competitive advantage. And he said, the reason we've invited you up here, he said, we need a product that offers sustainable competitive advantage. He says, I said, well, in the grass cutting? He said, yes. I said, well, I don't know of anything in your industry, rotary mower. I said, now, if you want to branch off into reel mowing, which gets you into out of homeowners, into professional turf applications like golf courses, sports fields, large estates, I've got an idea. If I want to hear it. No, I can't just share it with you.
Is it an NDL? Did you get him to sign a non-disclosure agreement or
Yes,
something?
Rick Clifton was my good friend. He is my good friend, and he was my attorney back then. I called him up. Again, the guys were going back to no cell phone, no computers. And I said, Rick, they want to hear my idea. He said, well, let's get them to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. It took 2 days for Rick and their attorney to work out the verbiage that we all agreed on. And we finally agreed, we signed, and I told them a self-adjusting reel. And I had to explain all that to them because they were not in this industry. And I said, if we could develop, and if it worked, you would have, he said, is it patentable? And I think it would be. Well, his patent attorney was also Xerox's patent attorney, or the firm. He said, well, I got the firm that could patent it. So he agreed to fund the development. And I came back to Andalusia, and my guys we redesigned the reel so that we could spring load the reel to bed knife, and it worked.
Wow.
And so he applied for and got a patent in my name, and we got it patented, and we built one and tested it. And we actually took it to a trade show, golf course superintendent show, and the top superintendent in the world saw it, knew what we were trying to do, and insisted that we make him a set to go on his greens mower that he was using at Wingfoot in New York that was probably going to host a U.S. Open. And I introduced Mr. Ferris to Mr. Latchaw. I said, Mr. Latchaw is the #1 superintendent in the world, and he wants a set of these at Wingfoot. So we agreed to make him a set. And we took them to Wingfoot, and I flew in, and we set them up, and they had a defect. And I was disappointed because he was trying to mow. So he had also been the superintendent at Augusta.
Wow.
And those guys mow really, really close. I never expected the V-reel, the self-adjusting reel, in that application. I saw it for homeowners, for landscape contractors, for guys just mowing grass, not to mow those types of greens in those conditions. But the challenge had been set. And on my way back, I called Mr. Pierce up and said, we got a little bit of a problem. If that's the market we're going after, we got to make some changes. And it occurred to me how we could change the shape a little bit of that reel. And I got a second patent on this particular shape of that reel.
Was it a design patent?
Design patent.
Yep.
And things had transpired. I had sold the company. The V-reel actually implemented the interest of a company out of Kansas, Great Plains Manufacturing, and they made us an offer to purchase the TI International from my partners from Canada, and we sold it to them. And they wanted to take it. They wanted to take it to the next level, and we made some of the V-reels. They didn't understand marketing. I didn't stay with the company. It just became a fiasco, and they didn't last long. And the owner was calling me up, wanting me to buy the company back. And I had already been in the manufacturing business. I knew the kind of capital it took. And if it hadn't been for God overseeing the sale of TI, it was going to be bad. And I just said, I'm not getting back into that. And he said, well, see if you can sell it. And I did. I got Bush Hog out of Selma, Alabama, to purchase the company. They wanted to get in that industry. Bush Hog is the largest rotary mower manufacturer in the world. They started the rotary mower business. Not all rotary mowers are Bush Hogs.
Yeah.
But Bush Hog is unique in almost everybody calls their mower a Bush Hog, and it's not. You also, it's a verb. You're going to go bush hog your pasture.
Right. That's
no,
true.
You're going to go mow your pasture, but bush hog.
Yeah.
I mean, they are a very unique company. And I ended up getting them to purchase the company. And they developed the division called Bush Hog Turf. And those guys knew marketing, they knew product. They were a great bunch of guys to work with. They asked me to run the company for them, Bush Hog Turf Division, and I did. And we were blowing and going. I didn't think my world would come to an end. And about 3 years into it, the company that owned Bush Hog got into trouble. And they sold Bush Hog to raise money. And the new owners of Bush Hog, after reviewing the industry, just didn't want to get into the golf course business. They wanted to grow Bush Hog larger in the ag divisions, industrial division, and grow Bush Hog from a $300 million company to a $1 billion company. And they didn't just see that kind of future in the golf equipment business. So Bush Hog was out. Yeah. And that's when I got an investment banker to buy it. And he and I didn't get along together. And I exited his relationship. But he didn't last long. He wanted out. And I got the Aaron's Corporation out of Wisconsin to purchase it. Aaron's did real well with it. I never worked for Aaron's. I just put the deal together. They kept it about 6 years. And Aaron's had 2,500 employees. I think it was in Wisconsin. They had 25 down here. And it just became a logistics nightmare for them. And I got a call from Mr. Dan Aaron's, the owner. He and his brother owned Aaron's Corporation. He said, Don, it's just not working. We'd love to sell it back to you. I said, I've been asked that question before. I said, God don't want me to be in the manufacturing business, so I'm not going to get back in it. And it was basically, okay, well, we're just going to shut it down. Well, Cheryl and I had acquired an old building on Highway 29, not too far from where this podcast is being filmed. And we had bought the building at a bargain and had put a lot of sweat equity into refurbing it, repainting it, getting it useful. I was just simply going to rent it out. We're going to rent the warehouses out for people to store boats in. Going to rent the offices out for realtors or whomever. And they put the company on a live auction. You log in. So I log in and then I see that equipment that nobody knew what it was for. And I'm buying it. I was just buying it. And Cheryl picks me up for lunch. She said, wasn't that auction today? I said, yeah. She said, who bought it? She said, did you buy it? And I said, I did. She said, don't have to explain it. She said, that was your baby. She said, I understand it. Make me one promise. One promise. Don't put us in debt. She said, I'm not going to sign paperwork that will mortgage our house, so you can forget that. And I agreed with her. I mean, I had been there, and I want to tell that story before we're done. And so we started turf. That's when the turf ride started.
What year was that?
Oh, shoot. It's been about 10 years ago. So I brought the equipment from the facility that Aaron's had shut down and set it up in the warehouse. No insulation. Even today, it's extremely hot back where the guys work. But I was able to hire all the guys over a month or two, a few months and a year or so, hire most of the guys that had started with me back in me and Bill Coy back in the TI International days. And they're working today. And we've grown it to a reputable, respectable company. We have some more patented products that we've incorporated. We are the name in the industry for 2 or 3 of the products. We're known worldwide. God's really blessed us, there's no doubt, to put me in that position again. But at 68 years old, I needed an exit plan, so we've actually put Turf Ride on the market and got some interest in it. I'd love to stay involved for another few years. But that's where we are with that.
So you've mentioned God a lot in this podcast and how he's helped your business and stuff. And I just want to go back to how did you come to know Jesus and all of that?
I was, I guess, fortunate being raised by a mom that was a believer. She was probably the best Bible storyteller that I've ever been around. And she made sure that we were in church growing up. And Dad took care of business. Mama took care of family. And made sure that we were in church. We were always members of a small church. I grew up in East Highland Baptist Church was the one that I attended mostly, but Emmanuel Baptist Church is no longer in existence, is the one that I actually was saved in. I was young. I'm 7 or 8, maybe 9 years old. My sister, Jatricia, she had accepted Jesus and had gone forward and made a public profession. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, when I die, I don't want to go to hell. I don't either. What do I do? She said, "You need to believe in Jesus. Jesus is our Savior." And I remember Mama telling the story. So I said, I want to be a part of that. I want Jesus to be a part of my life. So the preacher talked to me, and even though I was young at the time, I fully understood my purpose or my motives, and so I went forward and made my profession of faith and was baptized at Point A Lake.
Wow.
And I think even to this day, I'd love to see a resurgence of churches coming together and let's have baptisms in the river.
Yeah.
But I was baptized at Point A Lake, and we'll always remember that day. And so Jesus has been a part of my life at a young age, and the mother making sure we were in church. And again, I'm gonna bring Daddy back into it in a few minutes. But Daddy never went to church. He didn't chide my mama on her being a part of church and making sure that Jesus was a part of our life, that she would make Daddy ask the blessing at dinner or supper, but that was it. I mean, Daddy he was a great businessman, an honest man, well respected, smart, successful, everything that a businessman ought to be. He made sure that we were well taken care of. I've never heard Daddy breathe a word of God, Jesus, Bible, church. It just wasn't in his life. Was Mama. Mama was. And so Mother made sure that we were heavily involved in church, vacation Bible schools, any evangelists that came through, revival, homecoming, all of those things get church growing up. And shared with you earlier about the pulpwood. When I was in high school, 2 friends of mine and I pulpwooding, and bought a pulpwood truck. And it was an old dilapidated truck that got us by. And I was going to East Highland at the time, and it was Pack the Pew Night. It was a revival. Larry Reeser was the evangelist, and it was Pack the Pew Night. Well, I got my 2 pulpwooding worker friends to go with me, and several more classmates, and we packed the pew. And it was during that week that I learned about tithing. I had never heard a preacher preach on tithing, but the evangelist did. And I understood the importance of tithing from his sermon. So I started tithing as part of the pulpwood income. And one of my friends that week accepted Jesus. 2 or 3 more were rededicated their lives. So our old pulpwood company, we got real religious. To the point that we made sure every one of us was tithing. And we would we go to school now. We're in high school. As soon as high school is out at 3 o'clock, we straight to the woods to start pulpwooding. And we recognized that after the revival and after our professions of faith and our rededications and our commitment to tithe and to honor God, that the chainsaws ran better, the truck ran better, we were more productive, and we would start setting goals. And we would say if we could get 1 load this month and maybe 2 loads next month and 3 loads the next month. And then we just set a goal and we'd beat it. And we'd set another goal and we would beat it. We had set our goals and we were about to break our all-time world record. I don't remember what that was. It might have been 3 loads for the month. And Cheryl and I were dating. And she wanted to witness this historic event. And the old truck, now when we got ready to go from the woods after we had loaded it to the wood yard, I would follow my driver. and we would pull onto the wood yard and onto the scales, and they would weigh us in and give us our ticket, and I would take the weight tickets then up to my guy that was paying us. And so we were headed to the wood yard, and I was following the truck, and Cheryl was following me in her car. And we had to be through the gate at 4:00. And it was like 3:45. And we were doing the best we could do to get there. And the truck wasn't the fastest in the world. I mean, we had to take it slow and easy. And we had turned the last turn, and we're headed down the hill. We were within probably 200 or 300 yards of the wood yard to get in the gate. And the truck just quits.
Oh, no.
Just like you'd switched it off. And we had worked on it enough. We knew it. We throw the hood open, and we were like a NASCAR pit crew. We're all over that truck. Try it now, Steve. Try it now. Still nothing. Still nothing. Cheryl, pull your car around here. Because she had the best battery of the bunch. So she pulls her car around. And we jump it off. Still nothing. Still nothing. And we go straight to the starter. And we cannot get the starter. It won't do nothing. So we're standing in front of that truck, and we're all exasperated, and we're kind of dejected and looking down. And it was like, hey, Steve, when did you get those new boots? Because we knew how much money each other. We knew how much money. We knew each other's finances. And we're all dating. And we had our girlfriend responsibilities, Where'd you get the boots? Where'd you get the money, Steve? I didn't pay my tithe. I used my tithe money and bought the boots. Oh, we jumped all over it. David said they're sin in the count. They're sin in the count. So he says, okay, I promise. He said, I'll double up next Sunday. And so it's 5 minutes to 4 that he crawls back in the truck, and it fired right up.
That is hilarious.
And he drove it, and we got it through the gate right at 4:00, and we broke our all-time world record. But we had to confess sin.
Yeah.
We had made a commitment,
Yep.
and we didn't fulfill that commitment. And that has stayed with me, guys. I mean, we were 16 years old, and that has stayed with me through the years. Cheryl and I married. We knew we needed to get involved in church. And Chase, I think, maybe was a baby. And my brother Alan had joined First Baptist Church. And growing up, I have the same vision or view. A lot of people, I hear it even today. That's a big church. Y'all just too big. People don't know. And that was the mentality back then. And Alan had invited us to church. And he said, guys, it's not as big. The building may be big, but you're going to know everybody in there. We're like one big family. So Cheryl and I had agreed to go to church with he and Angie. And when I walked in there and sat down, and they took up the offertory, I saw businessmen that I was dealing with. And I was able to share this with one of them before he passed away, Marlon Bass. Marlon Bass was an oil distributor, and that's who I bought my fuel from and my oil from. And there was Marlon Bass taking up the offering. And there was Mr. Merrill, who owned the car dealership, saying the prayer. And there was Mr. Taylor, who owned the Ford dealership that Dad had bought the tractor place from. I never related business and God and church. And it just, there was these guys that I dealt with out in the real world. They're involved in church. See, my dad wasn't. My dad was a great businessman. But I never related business and church together or God together. Well, Cheryl and I ended up joining First Baptist Church. And that's what we're members today, and chasing rain through that, and grandkids are involved, and I'm thankful for that. And so it just gave a different perspective to me that guys can be godly and can be business. I just never related that. Okay. Bill, my friend in Canada, Bill and I had started TI International. We retaliated against the challenge given to us by not having product to sell. We decided to make it. We got into the manufacturing business. Nobody could have convinced us back then we were too young, we were too hard-headed, and could have convinced us the challenges that manufacturing offers. Because we're in it. And we made that commitment. We got into the manufacturing business and realized fairly quickly it takes a lot of capital to be a manufacturer. You got to buy the raw material. You got to process the raw material, which includes labor, overhead. Then you finally get your product made. Now you're ready to sell that product. You got marketing expense. You get that product out on the market, you finally sell it, and it may take a few days or weeks to get paid for it. Well, there's a long time from the time you bought that raw material to the time that you can sell the product, and it takes a lot of capital. And it was eating up our capital, and we were struggling. And we had a friend that had invested some money, but he had gone about as far as he wanted to go. Dad, heartache to misery, the bank that we were doing business with went out of business. We didn't know that was going to happen. Some of the other banks were kind of, it's like, nah, why didn't you come to us? We would be here for you. So there was no bank that back then that we could lean on and go to. So we were struggling. It was payday to payday, and a lot of sleepless nights, and a lot of things that I didn't share with Cheryl, and I didn't want her to worry. She was raising the boys, and it was kind of my ballywhack. And so Bill and Tony and I we were attending the golf course show up in Ohio, and I drove up there. And here's the first intervention of God. The two salesmen that I had working for me at the time, the three of us would have ridden together, but I couldn't leave in time. So they had to go on without me, which meant I had to drive up there by myself. And it's about a 12-hour drive. So it gave me a lot of time of reflection, of soul searching, of what are we going to do? So I had made up my mind that when I got to Ohio, and Bill and Tony were coming down from Canada, we had to call it quits. We couldn't keep going. It was time to close the doors. We were young. We were going to end up with debt. We'd just work it out. I could go back and work for Daddy. Bill had his business going with his brother. We just do what we had to do. So we got to the trade show, and we were displaying the special reel that had the spring loaded. And one of the ways that you wanted to make sure that it would cut paper was to take a wet rock and hone those blades, make them razor sharp. Well, they had the display set up, but a couple of the other blades wouldn't cut paper. I said, no problem. I go get the wet rock. Well, we can't find it. We left the wet rock, I guess, back in Andalusia. And I said, well, let's go find one. So I'm walking around the trade show, and guys would carry knives on their, on their pocket. You could hang them from there. Hey, I see you got a knife. Yeah. You gonna borrow it? No, I'm looking for a wet rock. Some guys may have a little wet rock. No, I don't have one, but I got a knife you can borrow. No, I don't need a knife. I need a wet rock. So I'm walking around, I see another guy with a knife opening a box. Hey, I see you got a knife. You got a wet rock? No, I don't have a wet rock. But I got this buck knife. You don't borrow it? No. Great thing buck knife does, isn't it? Then what? You buy a buck knife, there's a note in there that says God runs their company. And it quotes John 3:16. He said, when they have a board meeting at the Buck Knife Company, the head chair is where God sits.
Wow. But that blew your mind.
I had a sensation came over me. And wow. Well, we didn't find a wet rock, but we made our way through the show. We did well enough that that's where Great Plains saw us and came back and made the offer later. But anyway, we do the trade show. Now I'm driving back home by myself. And we drive, I don't have the money to get a hotel room, so I'm driving straight through. And I'm behind the truck on High 70. And most of the times, even today, you'll see, how am I driving? Dial 1-800 so-and-so. Well, on the back of this truck, it said, if God is for you, who can be against you? And I rode behind that truck for miles reading that. And the same sensation that came over me as did when the guy told me about Buck Knife Company. I said, wow. So I get to Louisville and I'm turning, I'm down I-65 headed toward Birmingham, Huntsville, through Huntsville to Birmingham. The sun is starting to come up. And there was this big billboard and it had big flashy letters that were flashing in the sunlight. It says, Jesus is the answer. That same sensation for the third time. So I exited, went to a payphone. And I called Bill. I said, Bill, we're not going to quit. Because we had an agreement that as soon as I got home, I was going to call the employees together and tell them we were going to quit. I said, Bill, we're not going to quit. He said, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to pray. Because Bill was religious. Bill was active in their church, in their community. So it wasn't foreign to him. It wasn't foreign to either one of us. We just had never, of all of our business plan, of all the things that we had done, all the people that drew the drawings of the machine shops that made the parts for us, God never was a part of that. We didn't ask God to help us do any of that. I said, pray. And I said, when I get back to Andalusia, I said, I'm not going to call them in to shut the place down. I'm going to call them in to pray. So I got back to TI International, go in, and I had the two ladies that worked there, both, one of them's husband was a preacher. And I called everybody in the break room. There was about 15 employees. And they knew we were struggling. In fact, their paychecks had bounced. So they knew it was tough. So I called them all together, and I'm sure they fully anticipated I'm calling an end to it. I said, guys, I've had a revelation, and I shared with them exactly what I just told y'all about. I said, we're not quitting. We're going to pray. I said, every morning when the bell goes off, you clock in, and you want you to come to this break room on company time, and we're going to start our day out with a devotion and a prayer. Now, you're not going to get fired if you don't come. You're not going to get a raise if you do come. But I'm making it available because God has got to be a part of this plan. And one of the ladies spoke up, said, the wife of the preacher said, well, I'll do the devotion tomorrow morning. I was okay. But I didn't know how we were going to do it, So the next morning, buzzer goes off. Most of them came in, and she read the devotion. We had a prayer, and y'all get to work. We get to work. So I go back to my office, and the phone rings, and I can tell you this: my daddy has never lied. My daddy would not tell a lie, and I was raised around that. But I can tell y'all, people were calling, hey, we sold you a load of steel a month ago. When are you going to pay me for it? We need our money. We put a check in the mail yesterday. No check in the mail. I mean, you just got caught up into that. And I had conversations that I would not want my sons, Chase or Ray, hearing my end of the conversation. I can't say that about my daddy. My daddy would never have asked me, hey, can you step out? Let me talk to this guy.
Right.
Right. And I couldn't, my life wasn't there. And phone rings. It's okay. I just got to tell them the truth. I mean, God's tired of this lying. Answered the phone. Hey, Don. We met in Ohio at the Turf Press Conference last week. Yes, sir. He said, we're interested in your product. Okay. So would you like to build some for us under license? Would you like a partnership, or would you like are you interested in selling lock, stock, and barrel? said, Mr. Applequist, all the above. He said, well, I'd love to come down and talk to you. I said, how soon can you be here? Well, he came on. He flew from Kansas, came into town about 3 days later. Of course, as soon as I hung up, I called my partners and said, Bill, Tony, hey, listen, what happened? I said, man, this is our answer, you know. Well, Mr. Applequist came into the office and showed him around the plant. And I brought him into my office. I said, Mr. Applequist, I got to share something with you. I don't know where you are in your religion. I don't know where you are with God. I said, but let me tell you where we are. Because I wanted him to hear the story, and I told him what I just told y'all. He said, well, you need to know that I've got several vice presidents. They've got to be born-again Christians. He said, we fund a Christian college in Kansas. He said, I know exactly where you're coming from. He said, I know exactly where you are. He said, I know you need money. That's Jester. He said, well, we're going to do a deal. We want what you guys are building. It's going to fit perfectly in what we're doing. And he said, I'm going to go ahead and give you some money now. Get you out of a bind.
Wow.
And he wrote a personal check.
Man.
And left it with us.
What a God story. You know, the thing that strikes me from this is, I've told this story before and I won't get into the length of it, but I was very much like you in a sense where, you know, you've got God, you've got church, you've got family, you've got business. How do they all connect? You know, it's like, well, we go to church. But ultimately, if God is in us, living in us, then ultimately that's supposed to permeate every area that we touch, right? It's going to be how we treat our family. It's going to be how we treat our clients. It's going to be a part of the business that we're in. So it's amazing to hear the struggle, the don't give up, a real miracle, you know what I mean? But what did it do for you? You know, God's ultimately looking at the development of Don Cotton, of his family, of the people around him, you know, and recognizing that God is in your business and in the interactions that you have with, you know, this is secular over here and this is sacred. This is my church life. This is my business life. But getting to see that it's one life, you know, there's one Lord, one Savior, one life that we live. And to hear how God kind of got you to that point where you understood that, hey, he don't want me on the phone just saying, yeah, check's in the mail, you know, whatever. But he wants me to bring that honesty in and just the tenderness of your heart at that period to be able to go through that and what it's led you from there toward for the rest of your life. Just amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Of the many evangelists that I've heard through my life, one also impressed me with this, and it hit exactly what you just said. Sometimes we look at our lives like a pie, and you have this section for family. You have this section for church. You have this section for recreation. And this piece of the pie is for maybe something else. This piece of the pie is for God. You know, how big of the pie should God's piece be? None of it.
The whole pie, right?
He's in the middle.
That's right.
He's in the middle, and he's touching every piece of your pie.
Yep.
Whether it's your family, your business, your recreation, God's in the center of that pie. And I thought, man, that's right on. I like that analogy. But it still is a venture. I mean, but the way God has appeared, and I've been able to recognize his working through different aspects. Even now, I mean, any business that you're in, you're going to find challenges. But the neat thing about it, if you're letting God help you work through this, he'll make a way that you can't even think of. You can think of every way known to mankind that this situation is going to work out. But God will give you an idea. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Wow, that's better than what I thought of.
So you're kind of getting to the end of your career. You've seen God active in your life, moving in your life and your family. You get the blessing of just being still with your dad on Friday lunches and things like that. You got a bunch of grandkids coming up behind you. What would you say from a legacy standpoint you would like to leave with them? A word of wisdom, a thought that your grandkids one day can look back and say, this is what my grandfather was about. This is the lesson that he really wanted to leave with us.
I can do that. But I've mentioned my dad several times.
Yes.
And I can't leave him out of the God element.
Go into it. Tell us.
Well, Dad changed his life. And he accepted Jesus as an adult.
Wow. How old was he?
We were gone. And Mom just never gave up on him. And he came in one day. She tells the story. She's passed away about 8 or 9 years ago. But she tells the story that Dad came in one day and said, Joanne, I want what you got.
Oh, man.
And she said, I don't know, Jesus. Yeah. He said, how do I get Jesus? She didn't believe him. He said, I'm ready to change. And Dad wasn't a drinker. I mean, it wasn't. And he said, I'm ready to live I'm ready to live for your God. She didn't believe him. She said, I tell you what, Don, you go right out there in that front yard. You kneel down behind that big pine tree out there and you ask God for forgiveness. You ask Jesus into your life. You do that and I might believe you. He did. She watched him.
Wow.
He came back in the house. And his best friend growing up, Brother Collis Thorne, became a preacher and had a big ministry down in Fort Walton. Had a big church, what we would call a mega church now, and school all the way through kindergarten through college, and had grown it out of the living room of his house in Wing, Alabama, where Daddy lived. Well, they were best friends. So Uncle or Mama said, you call Brother Thorne and tell him, so I think he even came up to celebrate, Daddy's new birth.
Wow.
And Daddy got really involved down with Fort Walton in their church, became a deacon. They put him on the board of all things of business. And so Daddy was a great businessman. And so my legacy, if I could just be part of what my daddy's legacy has left us, he didn't start out that way, but he certainly has ended out on top.
Wow.
And it took me maybe not quite as long to get there. I was a little younger. I accepted Jesus young, but having God as part of everyday life, not just church life.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Let God be a part of everyday life.
That's right. My favorite quote is A.W. Tozer. He said, whatever you do, whether sacred or secular, it's not determined by the office held, but by the motivation of the heart. And that's where God wants us. He wants to grab the heart. And so that is so good. I was going to ask you off camera. I didn't know if that was a subject or not, because I don't obviously know your dad like you do, but that's an amazing thing.
Well, he prays for all of his grandkids and his kids, and it worries him now at 95 years old. Chase and Leanne and Savannah just got back from Europe. It worried him the whole time they were gone. And if I had to go somewhere, he prays us there and he prays us back. So he's still active in all of our lives, and even though he don't get out as much as he used to, but that's a legacy. Just stay involved with the children, the grandchildren, and maybe the great grandchildren, and as time goes on.
Well, thank you for coming on here. It's a good thing we did this. The whole reason we're doing this, there's a lot of stuff I didn't know about and a lot of stories I think about sometimes. And I'm like, is that really how it went? I don't know. So I'm glad we're recording this. We have this on video and it'll be here forever so we can show it to people. And it was just a good time. So thank you for coming on here with us and talking to us about your whole life. And it was a good time.
I want to thank you all again. It's quite an effort that you put into this and quite a production. And it's a good thing. I mean, I hope you continue doing it and others got stories to tell just like I got, and we need to hear those.
That's
And
right.
We're not in this together alone. We're all in this together.
Absolutely.
But again, I want to thank y'all.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. We really appreciate it. And to our audience, thanks for watching. And until next time, God bless. And we'll see you on the next one.
See ya.